So I'm here to talk about the Microcosm by Hologram Electronics. It's an amazingly unique effects processor. There also seems to be a bit of confusion about it, so I'm here to try to make things a little clearer. I've seen some great videos on YouTube of people doing really interesting ambient stuff that includes large washes of sound and also little glitchy things. It's incredible, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to feed the simplest sounds possible into this thing so that you can hear more of what the microcosm is doing and less of what the synthesizer is doing. If you saw my Deluge video, this is another one of those boutique items, as in you cannot get it in a store. You have to order it directly from Hologram Electronics. They're usually back ordered, but if you buy one, they'll usually ship you out one in the next 4 to 8 weeks, next time they do a run of manufacturing. As soon as it came out, it became like the holy grail for ambient guitarists. It does a lot of different sounds, reverb, delay, glitchy stuff, micro loops, granules, and it's also a looper. But aside from guitar players, you're starting to see all sorts of people use them. I see a lot of synthesists use them as a simple and evocative box for ambient stuff. But I've also seen people playing harp through them, saxophone, hung drum, all sorts of different things. I just want to take a close look here and show you in detail some of the features, some of the parameters, some of the sounds it makes, and you'll have a better idea of whether it might be right for you. I'm not going to try to show you all of the sounds in the microcosm because it is vast. Because of the way that some of the parameters affect other parameters, if I was going to show you all of the sounds you could come up with, this video would be a couple of hours long. Some of the things that make it different from other pedals out there, it's got a MIDI input, which allows you to sync it with your other gear, drum machines, synthesizers, with your DAW. That way, the effects that you're using can be in time with the BPMs of whatever clock source you have. The other thing it has is an expression pedal input. If you plug an expression pedal into this, you'll have a foot control which will allow you to modulate or change certain parameters. Almost all the settings are available from the front panel, but there are some global settings and other controls that are not listed here. This 4-segment LED display also gives you a lot of feedback on different aspects of how the pedal is operating. Let's dive into this microcosm and take a listen. I'm starting off with a very short hi-hat sound. This way we'll be able to hear exactly what the microcosm is doing. I'm going to go into multi-delay, which is a digital delay type. This is the mix knob. It mixes between the dry signal and the affected signal. So I'm going to set it so we can barely hear the original signal. We're just hearing what the microcosm is doing to that signal. So, activity and repeats. These are your two main controls when it goes to time type effects. Activity is a complexity. Repeats is how many echoes there are, like a feedback knob on most echo machines. So the next thing we're going to play with is the shape knob. The shape knob is basically a way to choose different envelopes, different types of attacks and decays. So if we set it all the way to the right, pretty standard digital delay. And this is the time knob, obviously. An important thing to keep in mind in this is because the device can slave by MIDI to an external clock, the BPM of whatever you're feeding into it will affect all of these parameters, all of these effects. This foot switch is used as a tap time. So if you look here, see the beats per minute there. Now, that time will affect these delays. So if we listen to the delay here, changing the tap tempo changes the speed, even though we've set it here. So let's listen now to the activity. I'm going to crank that up and some more repeats. Pretty standard stuff. But as I change this shape knob, I'm going to turn it all the way to the left, which looks like a square wave. There are groups of 8. I'm going to slow this down a little bit. If I set this up in the middle, you can hear how the attack slowly peaks. And once again, envelope with a heart attack. Fades out in a more linear fashion. So let's listen to some of the other delays we have. In each of these groupings of effects, there are a few different effects of the same type. There are a few different categories within that type of effect. But within each of these, there are 4 different variations. In multi-tap delay, there's A, B, C, D. So that makes it easier to remember things and find them. So now we're going to go to pattern B of the multi-tap delay. This is just another rhythmic pattern. Let's listen to C. And now D. This is the amount of reverb you're dialing in. Mosaic, the micro loop, is a series of multiple loops which play back at different speeds. Let's listen. Some of these loops play back at regular speed. Some of the loops play back at double speed. So if this was a tuned instrument, those loops would be an octave higher. On Mosaic B, it's another series of loops. The complexity is determined by activity. How long they go for is determined by this repeats knob. The difference is, in B, they play back at regular speed and half speed. Now, if this was a tuned instrument, those half speed ones would be an octave lower. So let's just listen to that on this same simple hi-hat sound. And with any of these, the time changes everything. You can double the speed, multiply it by 4 times, 8 times, slow it down by a half, slow it down by a quarter. And then if we add some reverb, you'll begin to hear how all of a sudden it becomes quite dense and distant. So as you can hear, there's a lot going on there from one hit. The last thing we're going to listen to is Mosaic D. This way, you've got some complex loops playing back at normal speed, double speed, quad speed, and half speed. If this was a tuned instrument, you'd have some things that were an octave lower, some things would be an octave or 2 octaves above the original note. Let's talk about a couple of other things at the front here. Loop level, this affects only the volume of the looper. the phrase looper, which is an independent thing. The mix is always between your dry signal and the effects, all of the effects. The filter is a low-pass filter. So as you roll it counterclockwise, it rolls off top end. There's a secondary name written smaller and in gray on each of these knobs. To access that, you just push down this shift button. So for instance, space, when you push that down, it determines the reverb time. This space knob just controls the amount of reverb. To change the time, like how long a decay it is, you push this button down. As soon as we push this button down, and watch these LEDs. So you have these 4 settings. They go everything from a small room to a large ambient effect. I want to talk briefly about this phrase looper. One of the great things that it has is this pre or post effect setting. So if you do it as pre-effect, what it does is it records anything coming into the looper dry into the looper memory. Any effects that you had, as well as the mix and the filter, affect all of the loops. Now that doesn't matter if you have 15 overdubs, they all get affected the same. That may be useful depending on what you're doing. But if you want, you can use post effects, which means that all of the loops that you record into the looper get recorded with whatever settings you have. You could record your first loop with one effect, then play around with some sounds, find a different sound, some different effects that you want, record your next overdub with a completely different effect, and all of those effects and settings get recorded into the looper. Now, of course, that can also be very complicated because, as you can hear, these sounds get very detailed, very long, very busy. If you take into consideration that with tune notes, you're adding octaves above, octaves below, your sound can become immense. Another thing they've done is with any of these settings, whether you're using a micro loop, the granules, multi-delay, the glitching, all you have to do is push this button, the selection button, and the effect plays backward. And if you take a look at these LEDs here, they indicate to you which way it's going. Another really interesting feature about this looper, this is a bypass. As soon as you bypass it, if you can see, your little lights are still on, they're just dimmed. So it indicates to you what the settings on the pedal are, so that once you activate the pedal again, you're not going to be surprised at what the settings are. You'll be able to see exactly what they are. You can change all the settings while you're in bypass mode. As soon as we activate, it's live. Now, I could spend hours going through some of the other subtle controls on this machine, but I'm going to save that for another video. What I really wanted to do was show you the type of activity within the sounds. There's one more brilliant feature that a lot of pedals don't include. You can store 16 user presets in the pedal. So there are 4 banks of 4 presets that are all color-coded. They remember all of your sounds, and they can also include loops. I also want to mention that the loops on this machine are limited to 60 seconds. So what I'm going to do to demonstrate these effects is I'm going to create a small motif on the deluge, and then I'm going to let it play. I'm going to keep it really simple, just a few notes, and then I'm going to go through a few presets so you can hear how that same sound is transformed. I'm going to start with the simplest, worst sound that I can. Now I'm just going to play around with this arpeggio setting. It breaks apart the notes that are played and puts them into different types of arpeggios. That's my overview. As I said, it's a very complex piece of gear. It's very capable, and I'll do another video where I show you some of the more interesting sounds I've been able to get out of it.